welcome to A Woman's Heart. We're going to be having an amazing conversation. I just know this because we've already had some technical difficulties. But we have Jane Kirkpatrick here with us on our summer reading series. I know this is going to be so fun. And Jane, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's
You
great to
are.
be here. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I am so glad you are here. And as I mentioned before we hit record, my daughter's last name is the same. So we are bound somehow by marriage somewhere, somehow.
Yes.
Now.
Kirkpatrick. And you could tell your daughter, she probably knows this, but a Kirk is a church
Oh,
in
yes.
and a Patrick is someone who takes care of the church.
Okay, well, I didn't know that. I did know about the Kirk being a
Yeah.
church.
Yes.
So, very good. Well, she will be thrilled to hear that. And I am thrilled to know that because that is wonderful. And Jane, I always like to get to know my guest a little bit and let my audience know my guest. So, tell us a little bit about yourself and something fun that isn't normally in your bio.
Well, I came to writing somewhat late in my
Okay.
life. I was a clinical social worker and
Oh,
worked in mental health and directed a mental health clinic. And then I had this big detour in which my husband and I bought 160 acres of what I called Rattlesnake and Rock Ranch and at 11 miles from a paved road and 7 miles from our mailbox. And
oh
we
my
built
word.
a life there. And we're there for 27 years. And it was then that I felt called to write. So I had these other careers,
Hmm.
and part of that transition was that I was able to work for 17 years, commuting 2.5 hours to the Warm Springs Indian Reservation, again, working in mental health. So I've had just an extraordinary many opportunities, and I've been very grateful for that. So something fun, I would have to say it's time with the dog. I know I didn't mention the dog in my bio, but he's a little Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, and his name is
Oh.
Rupert. He's named for a children's character from a British series that was very popular, Rupert the Bear. And
Okay.
but we call him Rupee. He only gets called Rupert when he's in trouble.
Uh-oh.
So, just how my mother would call Jane was fine, but if I was in trouble, it was Jane Ann. Yeah,
Oh, yes, the
middle
middle
name.
name.
Yeah.
Yes. So Rupi knows if he's done something wrong when you go,
He does
"Rrr."
know. Yeah.
Oh, yes, yes. And our dogs know too. It's so funny. Our dog was on a walk and went after some wild turkeys in the woods and came back just covered in muddy swamp stuff, just nasty, gross. And she was so funny because I was talking to my husband afterwards. I was like, I noticed you gave her a bath. And he said, yeah. And you just kind of looked at her and went, oh, Kira. And she had this look of, oh, what,
They can look incredibly guilty. They
they
really
can.
can.
They
Yes.
can look so, so guilty when they've done something they're not supposed to. Oh my gosh. Well, that is fun that you really had that detour and started writing later on. And now that you say that you had a history as a clinical social worker, I'm like, oh, that would explain some of the themes in dealing with the mental health and that in the book because you had some of those things, but you also have them based on real characters. So I am curious how going from your career as a social worker and then going on this desolate, sounds like a desolate ranch. It's probably a beautiful, but I could do without the rattlesnakes. That would just make,
Yeah, I know. And rocks and
yes, yeah,
whatnot.
that would not be fun. You know, so with that transition, what made you want to go, well, let's try writing some fiction books?
Um, well, a couple things. One was that it was so remote. The land was so challenging, and my husband had health problems, and we had 5 acres that we couldn't keep up with. And so, of course, it was ridiculous to think about leaving our jobs and moving to this acreage. But I went to a women's retreat And that weekend I came back with, I, this is what we're supposed to do, is go to this land. And sort of the phrase that came to me was step out on a cloud of faith and believe you won't fall through.
Mm.
So but of course, I was like, well, what would I do down there? Because my skills were as an administrator and a therapist, and it would just be my husband and I. And I thought, oh, well, we could kill each other down there and be dead for weeks, and no one would even know because it was so far from
Yes.
anybody. 30 miles was the nearest town, and our nearest neighbor was 7 miles right by our mailbox. And anyway, again, and just sort of a very prayerful time, the word right came to me. And
Mm.
it was, I'd had some teachers who were very complimentary about my writing throughout my life, but I didn't think of it as anything I would actually do.
Do.
Um, and so, but I took a class at our community college, and the instructor happened to be just this wonderful man of faith, Bob Welch. You may have heard of him. He's written just many books, and we've taught writing classes together now. But he said, I don't know why, because I was very anxious. I thought there was probably a little statement across my forehead that said,
It's a little ticker
fraud,
tape.
fraud, what are you doing in this class? Um, and he said, I don't know why you're so anxious. He said, I think you have a gift, and I think we could sell some of these essays and things that I had done.
Yeah.
And I did. I was able to sell things. And so that was, very gratifying and reassuring.
Yeah.
And everything that could go wrong, homesteading went wrong. We couldn't, the phone estimate was like $84,000. And
Oh my
so
gosh.
the phone company said, we'll help you, we'll provide the line and you can dig a ditch 7 miles long and lay the line, which we did, but it didn't work the first time because it wasn't heavy enough
Uh,
wire. And so we had to do it a second time. And there were all these things.
mm.
And I was writing to family and friends to reassure them that we were still alive. And one of them wrote back and said, when we get your letters, we don't read them right away. We wait until after supper and we turn off the TV and we read them out loud because they're like a chapter in a book.
Oh.
And so then I thought, well, maybe I could write a book, not a how-to book,
Hmm.
but how to follow your heart, even when it seems like the most, when all of your friends and family think you've just dropped off the end of the world.
And
That
lost all your
that
marbles.
maybe that's the route that you ought to consider taking. And that resulted in the first book, Homestead, which came out the day before I turned 45.
Wow.
So, and actually, writing and healing are very, I sort of think of it as a double helix, with
Mm.
writing,
Yeah.
healing, and spirituality as the center of that helix that's going around. And so I didn't really feel like I had abandoned my profession,
Hmm.
clinical social work, but in fact just had a different format for it. And then I was given the opportunity to work for this Indian reservation, which was in mental health, but it was also just this wonderful opportunity to see the world in a different way and work with families. I got to deliver a baby there. I mean, these are
Oh,
all things that I never would have done in my whole life
yeah.
if I hadn't had that. So, and then one day, I thought, well, I've written my book. That's it. I went to the land. I've
One
written
and
my
done.
book. Yeah, I'm done. But there was this story that was connected to the reservation about this white couple, and they were thought of so highly by the native people, and I was just so intrigued with that, and I thought, well, somebody should write this story down. And it couldn't be me because it wasn't my family, and it couldn't be me because I hadn't lived in that community for 100 years, and it couldn't be me because I'd never written fiction.
Mm.
And so, but my husband said, if you think it's a great story, you should just write it down. And if people don't like their version, your version, they can write their own version.
Okay, well, there you go.
Yeah, so I was thinking, when would I do this? Because we were homesteading, I was commuting, I was working, but all I had been doing between 4 and 7 in the morning was sleeping.
Mm.
And so I thought I could set the alarm at 4 and my commitment was to be at the computer by 5 and to have 2 hours before I had to leave to commute, or go to work. And so the next day, we went to a historical society meeting, and I sat next to a man who said, "And what do you do?" And I said, "I'm a writer." And it was the first time I'd said that without disclaimers. And he asked me what I was working on, and I said, "I'm writing the story of Jane and Joseph Shearer," that was a couple's name,
Mm-hmm.
"and of life with the Wasco, Warm Springs, and Paiute people." And I had not yet written one sentence, but I'd
Mm.
done the hardest work because I'd made that commitment. And he said, "Well, you should meet my cousin." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, she owns the property that was their original homestead, and I'm sure she'd let you walk there."
Oh my
And
gosh.
so every book has had a moment like that, what I call it divine research, because I
Yeah.
never could have found those pieces. It's a document or an ancestor or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was the first novel, and there have been 40 to follow. So yeah.
Yes, well, definitely. Yes, then that you have been very prolific in all of that. And your latest book, With the Enduring Tides, is the second book in a series that's going to have three books in it. And we've already talked a little bit about the challenges of being the second book in the series and how I felt at the end of book two. And I'm looking forward to book three because there are some answers to some questions that I want with this. And some of the characters are completely fictional, but some of them are real.
Yes.
And so you like to have some real characters in your books. And you told me before we hit record that there's a very specific reason why you like to include real people. And why is that?
Well, I think it's the real person's story that has inspired me. And
Mm-hmm.
I always ask the question, well, how did that happen? In this instance, Mary had 4 children, was married, had 4 children, and they hired a nanny so that she could actually deliver the mail in the 1890s, not be a postmistress, which was stationary, but go
Mm-hmm.
up and over these
Yeah.
really incredible landscape. The northern coast in Oregon is very, very challenging, dynamic, and huge
Yeah.
cliffs and so
Mm-hmm.
on. And so that, her life and her choosing to do that inspired me to ask that question. Well, how did that happen? And where did she draw her strength from to do that? And what was the motivation for that? And I think that when a reader reads one of the books that I've written based on the lives of real people, that becomes an inspiration for them. It's something they can the word inspiration means the act of breathing in. And they can take
Ah,
something in from these stories that
yeah.
I hope sustains them and encourages them in their own long haul, in their own challenging landscape, that all of us are having to deal with. So, you know, I I think that the fact that they once lived and had to deal with the challenges of life and made it, maybe made some mistakes along the way, maybe messed up, but they
Yeah.
kept going. And, their family, their friends, and faith, to me, in all of these books has been the, the triplet support system for these wonderful stories.
Yeah, well, and these women certainly went through some very difficult circumstances and very complicated situations with family and friends. And yes, there was one in particular. I won't ruin it for everyone, but there was a particularly bad decision I think that Mary made at the beginning of the book that I was very upset about that decision, and it did have dire consequences that were, yeah.
And I did worry that I do this at the beginning of this book. Will people turn the page? I don't know.
I was like,
But it
no,
happened, that was the
no,
time frame, and
why
that
did
was,
she do that?
I know, and it happened, there are many, many interviews that were done with her throughout her life, so that
Oh.
I mean, I was able to get some of the motivation, and people will say, well, why didn't you just write a biography? And a biography tells you what someone did and when they did it. But a
Mm.
novel allows you to explore why they did what they did and
Yeah.
how they might have felt doing it.
Yeah.
So she had there were a lot of documents to point out her life, about she and her relationship with John, and photographs from the Historical Society. And those were all really enriching for the story.
Yeah.
Um, but it still required fiction to actually explore the emotional content of the story.
Hmm. Yeah.
Poetry, I think we actually, for the third book, we just discovered a short poem that she had written that was really, I think, really revealing of this optimism by faith that sustained her and kept her going, because she did have many more challenges. And as you know, at the end of the second book, she had another big challenge.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, she did. She did. She had a lot of different challenges. And I loved some of the themes, in sticking with Mary. She was the primary character, and she is introduced and she's in book one. I've not read book one yet. To get some of the background on some of these women. So we continue the story with Mary, and I loved how you portrayed the partnership. She frequently referred to her marriage with John as a partnership.
Mhm.
And why did you really want to include that, and how all did that come about? Because I just thought it was a beautiful way of exploring their relationship. Because at that time period, frequently marriages were the woman did what the man wanted, period, end of story, no questions asked.
Right. Right.
And none of these women were what you would think of as stereotypical,
Right.
1800s, I guess that's 19th century or early 20th centuries, right around the 1900 time period. None of them were what you would call stereotypically women of the time, at least in my mind. They all had a strength to them. But I would love for you to speak a little bit more about that partnership that you wrote about with Mary and her husband, John.
In doing the research for a number of stories that are set in that 1850s to 1900, that
Hmm.
era, I've constantly been surprised to be able to find documentation about the unique relationships that women did have with their husbands,
Hmm.
that they were seen more as equal sometimes, than maybe, say, back east. And the reason for that is that the work was so demanding
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
the
Okay.
homesteading was so demanding. And it wasn't nicely compartmentalized to say, the woman stayed home in the house, and on the census it would say at home. That was her occupation, at home. And so she looked after the house and the children. But in the West, that was not the limit. They not only had to look after the house and the children, but they had to be out there chopping wood, because the husband often had to go somewhere else to make
Hmm.
money, because these homesteads were,
Yeah.
you had to develop it first, but you also had to try to make money off of it. And the Oregon coast, of all of these different places where I've encountered and told stories of women and their marriages, um, the the frontier places, like a wet, rainy cliff, coast, very short growing season, is incredibly demanding. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah. It
they
was a very hard life.
and this is sort of an aside, but I really think, Wyoming was the first state to give women the vote.
I believe you're correct.
And
Mhm.
I think it was because men understood that the women in their life, their mothers and their wives, were equal partners
Yeah.
in the work that had to be done, in the work of, and there's certainly evidence that a lot of pioneer men did do things like cooking. They
Mhm.
did participate in that.
Yeah.
And in one of the stories about an early suffrage woman, her husband invented a washing machine for the sole purpose of helping her out. And they too had a nanny so that she could travel. It was called Something Worth Doing, but so she could travel and try to support the effort to get women the right to vote. So I think the partnership just it rolled into place there because they had mutual respect
Hmm.
for the need for each other. Mary had the contract to deliver the mail, but actually it was John's contract, and he had to let her have it because women weren't allowed to sign a contract for anything like that. You know, and I think about in the 70s, my husband signed a contract, co-signed a contract for our really good friend, a single woman, to
Hmm.
be able to buy a house because she couldn't get a loan
Yeah.
on her own. So, in many ways, women at that frontier time had, in some ways, a more egalitarian or a more equal opportunity than we had in the 60s and the 70s. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember that when my mom was telling me about how, yeah, they couldn't, and for some women, if they were married, they couldn't get their own bank account
Oh
without
no.
their
Yeah.
husband. And it was like, really, what? Even
Yeah.
even up to then they couldn't. I mean, I don't agree with it, but I understood it more further back. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I loved that. And but even so, she still had to be kind of bold enough and confident
Right.
enough in her faith because she was the first one delivering the
Right.
mail
Right.
that was not necessarily well accepted. I mean, she was accepted, but John caught some flack from people about letting his wife do
Yes.
that and
Yes.
not being at home and being a more traditional helpmate, and pulling, her weight. But then her being able to deliver the mail, there was so much about her being able to follow her dreams and being a better mother and a better partner about
Right.
that. And those are still themes that we deal with today, I think, as women, as, the expectations that other people put on us, but then being able to go, no, this is what I need. This is how God created me.
Right.
And having the courage to go out and do what you feel God has led you to do. Like you felt led to homestead and people were like, what to what are some of those obstacles that you think we have, and then how do we overcome some of those obstacles and discovering who God has made us to be, and then having that courage to follow it out and do it even when other people may not understand it.
I actually think that, many of them are internal. They are the stories we tell ourselves, that it's too fearful. Mary could have easily decided, I want to do this, but there were sections of the trail that were so narrow and right above a cliff. Um, and in the first book, one of her horses slides down about 250 feet on this slope that if he hadn't been stopped by a bunch of trees would have gone over the side. And she has to try and get him up, which she's able to do.
Mm.
But there are fearful things that happen, and I think that's one of the big reasons why we don't follow our hearts, why we don't trust that God is going to be there in the fear. Um, I think that there's a inner voice that we tend to listen to sometimes that is very self-critical. Well,
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
might want to do this, but I probably can't. I'm not capable. And most of us have had someone in our life at some point as children and growing up who sort of reinforced that. Oh, why would you want to try that? I don't see that you have any ability to do that. And that sometimes we listen to that. That's a louder voice than the Holy Spirit speaking to our hearts and saying, try this, do this. I'm going to let you I'm not going to let you step out in this cloud of faith and fall through. You can count on me. And so I think that those are, and I think the aloneness, there's a risk during that time period because people lived far apart. They didn't have a lot of interaction.
Mhm.
Often, they might try to travel long distances even to get together on a Sunday, but there were traveling pastors you may or may not. And Mary, in one of her oral interviews, said that when the traveling pastor couldn't make it, the small congregation would sit around and name their favorite Bible verse, and then they would all talk about that verse. So they found ways to sustain
Yeah.
themselves in that process. And I also think the challenge, if part of what your calling or your passion was in the arts, whether it was music or it was painting or something really, or writing, that would have been a hard time to follow that, because the daily demands of living took up so much time.
Yeah.
So, and what people often don't realize is that, I think I can't remember if I mentioned this before we recorded or after, but when I started getting up at really early at 4 and being at the computer by 5, I thought, oh, if I write that early, I'll be tired for the rest of the day and I'll be cheating the people who are actually paying me money to work.
Mm.
And what I discovered was the exact opposite, that I was so invigorated by those 2 hours, and I would try to stretch them so that I could get even more time in, because that was where I was getting my nurture. That was where I was getting fed, is
Yeah.
spending my time. I know people say writing is a lonely occupation, but I never feel less alone than when I'm writing. I
Mm.
feel like I'm in another universe. And I think if, the women who carved out that time to write their poetry as Mary did, there were women who became artists, who photographers. My
Yeah.
grandmother was an early photographer, but it took a belief in your passion and a trust that I this will not be taking away from my family. This is going to invigorate me.
Mm.
This is going to give me the energy I need to do the things I want to do for my family. And I think coming to that is a rough road for a lot of women today,
Yeah.
and it certainly was for women in Mary's time.
Yeah, yeah, and it was, and she definitely struggled with, staying at home with being there for her family, but then also being there for their job and the fulfillment of that, and the commitment that it took. And people were counting on her, and there was so many other wonderful characters in there too. I loved the community and their little book club, with the lending
Yep.
library, and so you really explored a lot of wonderful themes in this book, with the enduring ties, with the friendships and the marriage, and there were some mental health things in there, where the secrets that the way I saw it was the mother, the secret had just been eating at her. It just
Right.
really had been eating at her and was causing some serious mental health issues. And so that importance of being able to talk to somebody and not having some of
Yeah.
those secrets, that it does eventually come out. At least this time it did, but there were also a lot more questions involved with
Yeah.
that one as
Yeah.
well. So as part of the secret came out, with that. What are some of the things that, other than the beautiful story, what are you hoping readers will take away from this book?
I hope that they will. But let me just back up. There's a wonderful book written by a man named Kim Stafford, and he was writing a story based on his brother who had died by suicide 20 years before. And he was trying to come to terms with it. And
Yeah.
it's a poignant book. It's funny. It's wonderful. But at one point he said, all of us at some point end up in the cellar of sorrow. And
Mm,
he said it's a mark of our character how we climb up the ladder towards the light, no matter how dim nor strange. And I imagine each of these characters on a ladder that at some point in the story they experience that cellar of sorrow. And
yeah.
I think my hope is that people who read these stories relate to their own cellars of sorrow, and they can maybe explore, well, what are the rungs of the ladder? we're moving towards light, but what are the rungs? And so I will ask that question, what are the rungs? And some of them are, I think the most critical one is their faith and how that draws them forward. I
Mhm.
think it's family, it's friends, it's the arts. It could be music, it could be dance, it could be performing, it could be, painting. It's the landscape for a lot of people. They are nurtured that if they didn't have that, and I think for Mary, if she didn't have that ocean to
Mhm.
help
Yeah.
remind her about those tides, if she didn't have the joy of, when strawberries, wild strawberries bloomed, or her horses, or the
Mhm.
animals were really
Yeah.
important for many people. So it's my wish that as people read the story, that they would feel something for these characters, but also that they might look at their own lives and say, well, what are the rungs of my ladder? And have I been paying attention to them? When I'm feeling particularly lost in that cellar of sorrow, what's the rung of the ladder I can hang on to
Yeah.
move towards that light, no matter how dim nor strange, but to keep moving.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I took away was Mary would remind herself that this is temporary, that
Mhm.
as difficult as a season or a situation was, that and dark, that it was temporary, that didn't mean that it had to stay that way forever. And so that was one of the things I was like, oh, I like that, where she would remind herself that it was temporary.
Yeah.
And how I can sometimes, I may not use that particular word, but I was like,
Right.
this too shall
This
pass, or
this
this,
too will
yeah, this
pass.
isn't going to be like this forever.
Yeah, yeah,
This is a moment, this is a day, this is an hour, this is a
yeah.
season, whatever else. This isn't necessarily the end of the story. Well, Jane, I enjoyed the book, and I will be looking forward to the third one to get more answers to some of my questions that were left. As I told you, I would have liked a few more tied up with a neater bow, but that is me. And that is,
I don't think you're alone in that. I have had, I had this couple bought, they each ended up buying their own copy because they were trying to share the same book, and then they'd get mixed up about who was where with the bookmark. And so I was at this book event, and the man's wife said to me, what about this and what about that? And I said, you have to wait till the next book.
yeah,
And then later, after we were having coffee, her husband came out, and he said, okay, so I want to know about, and she said, his wife said, she won't tell you. You have to wait till the third book. So
yeah.
you're
We'll
not
just have to wait for the
alone.
third
Yeah.
book. Yeah, well, we will look forward to that third book, and we have many, many others to choose from. And before I ask that, I do always like to ask, in my interviews when I speak to people, this has been a passion of yours. What would you say to encourage someone else to pursue the passion that God has placed in their heart?
I would just ask them to trust that the Holy Spirit is in their world. And Ephesians 3:20 is one of my favorite verses because it talks about um, what God can do beyond what we can ask for or imagine,
Mhm.
and the extraordinary life that God has planned for us. But we have to be willing to step out on that cloud of faith. And so whether it's you've always wanted to write a book, or your passion is for your grandchildren and you actually want to help, provide care for them, and people are saying, you're too old, that's going to be too big of a demand, any of those things, it's, I think, to listen to that inner voice that says, once you make a commitment to something, I will move and I will be there with you.
Yeah, no, I agree. Amen. Amen.
Amen. Yeah.
Yes. Well, Jane, if somebody is interested in this book, the other books that you have written, just a few, what is the best way for them to connect with you?
So I have a website, it's just
Okay.
jkbooks.com.
Okay.
And I have a Facebook page, Jane Kirkpatrick author. And I confess that or I guess I'm on Instagram now. I have my great niece is my web manager, and she's trying to get me to be more into that world. And so
Yes.
but those are, and I write a newsletter that people tell me is wonderfully inspiring. It's called Story Sparks.
Oh, good.
It's from my belief that stories are the sparks that
Hmm.
light our ancestors' lives, and they're the embers we blow on to illuminate our own lives. And so I write these little story sparks. It's kind of full of history, some things about writing. My dog Rupert has a column where he presents the world through his perspective. Um, and I review some books, and my schedule is also in there. So that's another way. And you can sign up for that at jkbooks.com.
Okay, well, we will include that in the show notes and encourage people to go there and connect with you, get all that. That I love the imagery of the blowing on the embers to spark the
Mhm.
thing. I think that is a beautiful image there. So we'll encourage people to do that and to read this one and then look excitedly forward to book 3 and all of that. And so, Jane, thank you for
My
listening and
pleasure.
doing your thing and of spending time with us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.